While I was away on a business trip, my mother-in-law cleared out my bedroom and moved my sister-in-law in to recover from childbirth. I just smiled, picked up my suitcase, and went to my parents' house. The next day, she frantically called, "Me quarantas at times. My name is Ava. If anyone were to ask me what the most painful feeling in a marriage is, I wouldn't say it's being yelled at, disrespected, or looked down upon. It's that moment you're standing at the front door of your own home, watching everything familiar being cleared away by someone else, and suddenly, realizing that for all these years, in their eyes, you were never the master of that place." That day, I finished my business trip half a day ahead of schedule. On the way home, my heart felt light. A few days earlier, my husband, Ethan, had sent me a sweet text. "If you get home early, call me. I'll come pick you up." Just a simple sentence like that had me smiling the entire ride. I even stopped to buy him a slice of the New York cheesecake he loved. I thought to myself, coming home early and giving my husband a little surprise might just ease the tension in our house. But as the Uber pulled up to the curb, a sense of dread washed over me. The porch was cluttered with unfamiliar shoes, adult-sized sneakers, and a pair of fluffy pink maternity slippers. Before I could even drag my suitcase inside, a strange combination of odors hit me. The smell of Bengay, Johnson's baby wash, and a pot of chicken soup simmering on the stove, all mixed with the scent of baby formula and freshly laundered, still damp receiving blankets. That smell didn't belong in my home. It was the scent of a different life, a different arrangement, and it was starkly clear there was no place for me in it. I stepped into the living room, my feet feeling as if they were glued to the hardwood floor. In the middle of the room, next to our sectional sofa, were several large black trash bags, hastily tied and bulging with my clothes. There was the cashmere sweater I'd bought last month. The J. Crew dress I always kept neatly hung. Even the collection of silk scarves my mother had given me were crumpled and stuffed into one bag like a pile of rags. I looked down and saw my makeup case open, a few of my favorite lipsticks rolling under the coffee table. My chest tightened. I didn't need to ask to know that someone had gone through my things with brutal carelessness. The master bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and my heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. The neutral beige linen duvet cover I'd just put on last week was gone, replaced by a garish, bright red floral comforter set. My nightstand had been shoved against the wall, my lamp tilted precariously to one side, right next to the window where I used to keep my small orchid. In its place now sat a baby bassinet draped with a thin veil. On my vanity, where my perfumes, moisturizers, and jewelry box once sat in perfect order, there was now a chaotic pile of baby bottles, burp cloths, and postpartum vitamins. A whole stack of unopened diaper boxes was piled in the corner. I was still standing there, stunned into silence, when the bathroom door opened. Chloe, my sister-in-law, emerged, her hair clipped up messily. She was wearing the very same gray silk robe I'd bought on a year-end sale last winter. She looked me up and down without a hint of embarrassment, a perfectly natural smile spreading across her face. "Oh, you're back. I was just telling Mom how airy this room is. And with the central air, it's just perfect for recovering with the baby." I turned to look at her, momentarily speechless. It wasn't that I had nothing to say, but because I couldn't believe someone could be so brazen. The robe she was wearing was mine. This room was mine. The vanity, the bed, the dresser, every 20 single item had been chosen and arranged by me, yet she stood there, speaking in such a casual tone as if I were the one who had wandered into the wrong place. Just then, my mother-in-law Brenda came up from the kitchen. She stood in the Palais Speedier doorway with her hands on her hips, her voice chillingly nonchalant. "You're back just in time. I was about to call you. Chloe just had the baby, she's weak. And with a newborn, she needs a proper spacious room. You and Ethan can move into the small guest room at the end of the hall for a few months. We're family. Making a little sacrifice for each other isn't a big deal." I slowly turned my head. Ethan was standing by the dining table, holding an unopened box of supplements, his eyes avoiding mine. I stared at my husband for a long time. All I needed was for him to walk over and say one thing to his mother, that this needed to be discussed with me first. Just one sentence. But he didn't. He pursed his lips, cleared his throat, and spoke like a detached bystander. Just be understanding, Ava. She just gave birth. We're family. After all. Family? The word hit my ears with a bitter sting. I took a few steps toward the filing cabinet next to my vanity. The top drawer was slightly askew, not shut as flush as it always was. The manila folders I kept neatly aligned were now in disarray, out of order. It was a small, fleeting detail, but I understood immediately. This room wasn't just being occupied for childbirth recovery. Someone had been searching through my things. And what they were interested in wasn't just the bed or the air conditioning. Perhaps sensing my prolonged silence, Brenda grew bolder. She stepped fully into the room, her voice shrill. Don't you dare put on that long face. We're all women here. You should know to have some compassion when someone is weak. Or do you care more about your precious bed than your own family? Your sister-in-law came here with a newborn in her arms. Are you really going to be that selfish and fight her for this room? I looked up at her, then at my husband, then at my sister-in-law, who stood in the middle of my room as if she'd lived there for years. Strangely, I didn't feel rage. I didn't cry or scream. A coldness washed over me, so profound that years of suppressed frustration seemed to freeze into a solid block of ice. I pulled my travel-dusted suitcase to the edge of the bed. I opened it and quietly took out a few essential outfits. I gathered my personal documents, my laptop, and my savings account statements, placing each item carefully in the innermost compartment. The whole family watched me, probably thinking I was throwing a childish tantrum. But when I zipped the suitcase shut and pulled it towards the door, I turned back and offered a faint smile. Yes, I understand now. I see very clearly today who in this house needs this space more. With that, I walked straight out. Behind me, Brenda's voice followed, dripping with contempt. Go on then. Let's see how many days you last once you leave this house. I didn't turn back, because in that very moment, I knew with absolute certainty that the one who was about to panic wasn't me. That night, after dragging my suitcase to my parents' house, I barely slept. I lay on my old bed, staring at the ceiling, my mother-in-law's words echoing in my ears. Let's see how many days you last once you leave this house. I was no longer angry enough to cry. I just felt cold. It was the coldness of someone who finally understood that the events of that evening were not spontaneous. They were the result of the countless times I had yielded, the countless times I had stepped back, allowing them, bit by bit, to walk all over me and take it for granted. Thinking about it, I remembered the early days of our marriage. Ethan and I had been married for nearly 4 years. When we first met, he wasn't the most ambitious or charismatic man, but he was kind, hardworking, and attentive. I used to think a woman didn't need an extraordinary husband, just someone with a good heart who knew how to love his wife. At the time, I believed I had chosen the right person. I even told myself it was okay if a man was a little weak in front of his mother. It just meant he valued his family. The condo we lived in was purchased with money I had saved up over years of working, combined with a generous gift from my parents before the wedding. My parents weren't wealthy, but they loved their daughter and scraped together what they could. I remember my dad handing me the bank check saying, I can't give you a life of luxury, but I want you to have something to stand on, so if anything ever happens, you won't have to feel helpless. I had laughed back, then thinking he was worrying too much. I never imagined I would one day recall his every word so vividly. All the property documents, from the purchase agreement to the final deed, were in my name. Initially, I saw this as normal. It was only natural that the person who contributed the most financially and put in the effort should have their name on the paperwork. But just as we were moving in, Ethan pleaded with me. He sat beside me, his voice soft and low. Ava, can I ask you for something? My mom is from a different generation. She can be very old-fashioned. If she finds out I'm living in a house my wife paid for, she'll never let me hear the end of it. Can we just let everyone on the outside think I bought this place? It would just make things easier with her. Between us, we know the truth. I remember being silent for a long time, not because I begrudged him the title, but because something felt off. But seeing the mix of embarrassment and desperation on his face, my heart softened. I figured men have their pride. As his wife, preserving his dignity in front of his relatives wouldn't cost me anything. That very thought it wouldn't cost me anything was my first mistake. Because once you compromise on a fundamental principle, others won't stop at just one step. From that day on, Brenda began to act like the true matriarch of the house. It started with small things. She moved the dining table, claiming its old spot had bad energy. She put away the new set of dishes I'd bought, calling them cheap-looking. She stored the decorative pillows from the living room, saying they looked cluttered when guests were over. I tried not to let these minor things bother me. But from small things, she moved on to controlling our meals, our daily routines, our schedules. One day, I came home late from work. She was waiting in the living room, her face like a thundercloud. This is a family home, not a dormitory. You can't just come and go as you please. I was the one who paid nearly all the bills. Electricity, water, HOA fees, parking permits. I paid for the new furniture, the A.C. repairs, the new washing, a machine. Ethan contributed, but very little, and he often had to send money to his mother. Yet, whenever relatives came to visit, Brenda would sit in the place, middle of the living room, her voice booming with pride. My Ethan is so capable. He provided a beautiful home for his wife. What does she know? She just goes to work and spends money. I would be sitting right there, hearing every word, but my husband would just offer a weak smile and never correct her once. A few times, I gently brought it up with Ethan. I told him he should at least tell his mother the truth, not to claim credit, but so she would know her boundaries. But every time, he would placate me. Come on, Ava, she's old. Why argue with her over this? Just letting it go won't cost you anything. Hearing it so often, I began to convince myself that in a family, someone has to be the one to yield for peace to exist. So I started yielding. I yielded when she brought distant relatives to stay for days without asking me first. I yielded when she rummaged through my kitchen cabinets and criticized my organization. I even yielded when she used her spare key to enter our bedroom to clean up. Despite me telling her clearly that I didn't like anyone touching my personal space, every time I showed my displeasure, her mantra was, my house, my rules. And the most painful part was hearing those words spoken in the very house that was legally mine. Yielding became a habit, and once it's a habit, people take you for granted. There were times I'd sit in my own living room and feel like a roommate who just paid rent. The couch I bought, the curtains I chose, the kitchen I paid to have installed, it was all there. But my voice in that house grew smaller and smaller. I used to believe that if I just lived with kindness and integrity, my mother-in-law would eventually see my true heart. But I was wrong. With people who are accustomed to overstepping, your kindness doesn't move them. It only makes them think you're weak. Things escalated when Chloe got pregnant and then separated from her husband. A strange feeling began to grow inside me. Brenda constantly said, your sister-in-law is just coming to stay for a little while to recover. When family has a hard time, we have to support each other. It sounded reasonable, but for some reason, every time I heard her say it, I felt a deep unease. There was something in her eyes, in Chloe's tone, in Ethan's evasiveness that told me this wouldn't just be a short stay. I never expected that premonition to come true, so quickly. It was then that a thorn, difficult to name, began to embed itself in my heart. At first, it was just a vague discomfort, like walking into a room and sensing something is out of place. But the feeling grew sharper, more defined, to the point where just seeing Chloe's sweet-talking smile made me anxious. Chloe wasn't a clumsy or simple woman. She was incredibly smooth-tongued, especially in front of her mother. Every time she visited, she'd start with compliments that sounded so genuine. Oh, my sister-in-law is so amazing. The house always smells so good. No wonder Ethan just wants to come home and be with his wife. It sounded affectionate, but living with her, I learned that her sweetness was just a sugar coating. Underneath was a calculated, persistent and utterly shameless nature. It began with borrowing a few things. One day it was a bottle of perfume, the bottle of perfume. Next, a tube of lipstick. Hey, can I use your new skincare set for a few days? I'm so broke right now, she'd say, as if it were nothing. Out of respect for her being my sister-in-law, and thinking it was just for a short time, I didn't object. But that temporary borrowing became a habit. Some items I hadn't even used yet, she'd already opened. A bottle of perfume I'd kept in its box was half empty when I finally opened it. I remember coming home early from work one day and finding Chloe sitting comfortably at my vanity. She was in her own pajamas but had my silk scarf wrapped around her hair, holding my brand new red lipstick, admiring herself in the mirror with a smug smile. When she saw me at the door, she remained completely unfazed. She even held up the lipstick and said with a laugh, "You work in an office. What do you need so many nice things for? Let me use it for a bit so it doesn't go to waste." My face flushed with anger, but I managed to keep my voice calm. "If you need something, just ask me. Please don't take things yourself. These are personal items, and I'm not comfortable sharing." I was clear, polite, and not harsh. Yet, less than half an hour later, Chloe was downstairs complaining to Brenda, as if I had just deeply insulted her. Brenda's face immediately darkened, and she looked at me as if I were a stingy, selfish child. She said something that I remember to this day. "It's just a few women's things, and you're guarding them. Like gold. Your sister-in-law is down on her luck. That's why she has to ask. You act like we're destitute." I stood there listening, a bitter taste in my mouth. The frightening part wasn't the lipstick or the perfume. It was how, from these small things, they were testing my boundaries, bit by bit, to see how much I would tolerate, how far I would retreat. And the more I stayed silent, the more they pushed. It wasn't just my belongings. Chloe had a smooth way of borrowing money. It was a few $100s for medicine, doctor's visits, and lab tests. She'd call me, her voice choked with emotion, making me feel sorry for her. "Ava, I'm in a real bind. Can I borrow this? I'll pay you back as soon as I can." I believed her and gave her the money, but I never saw it again. A short while later, it was money for prenatal vitamins, then for her health insurance, premium, her phone bill, her car repairs. Every loan came with a plausible to reason. Every time, she promised to pay me back in a few days, but those few days never came. The money was gone and the promises vanished like smoke. Once, I hinted to Ethan that his sister was borrowing too much, and that we needed to set a limit. He sighed, his voice full of irritation. "My sister is struggling. Can't you stop counting every penny with her?" I sat there in stunned silence. It was my hard-earned money she was borrowing and not returning, yet I was the one being painted as petty. But the incident that truly alarmed me wasn't about makeup or money. It happened a few months ago. I came home from work and saw the door to my home office slightly open. I walked in to find Chloe squatting in front of my desk drawer, her hands flipping through a stack of papers inside. Seeing me, she jumped, then forced a laugh. "Oh, I was just looking for a pair of scissors. I thought you might keep them in here." I said nothing, just walked over and closed the drawer. But in that brief glance, I saw that the photocopied stack of our property deed was no longer in its usual place. From that day on, I started paying closer attention. And then, another time, I saw Ethan himself, with my own eyes, taking pictures of my driver's license and our social security cards with his phone, along with some old documents that had my signature. I asked him what he was doing. He gave a pleased dotic, strained smile. "I'm just getting the paperwork ready for Chloe's residency application." "Why are you so tense?" His explanation made no sense. Why would a residency application require photos of the property deed, samples of my signature, and all my personal identification documents? When I asked him that exact question, his tone shifted, instantly his face darkening. "Can you stop thinking the worst of your own family for once?" That sentence was a wake-up call. An innocent person doesn't get angry. Someone with nothing to hide doesn't need to shout to drown out a question. From that point on, I secretly moved the original copies of all my important documents. Deed, the purchase agreement, bank confirmations. I moved all my personal papers to a different, hidden location, leaving only a few old photocopies in the printer drawer. I didn't want to falsely accuse anyone, but I couldn't afford to be a fool any longer. Strangely, as my business trip approached, Brenda and Chloe became unusually sweet to me. Brenda would cook soups and urge me to eat for my health. Chloe would smile and tell me to take care of myself on the road, even bringing a bag of fruit to my room for me to take along. That kind of attention didn't warm my heart, it sent a chill down my spine. Because when people who have disliked you for years suddenly become nice, it's either because they need something from you, or they're about to do something behind your back. By then, I started to believe that moving Chloe in to recover was just a convenient excuse. What they were truly after wasn't just my bed or the air conditioning. What they were after was that room, that filing cabinet, and the documents related to this house. I just didn't realize at the time how quickly and recklessly they would act. After everything that had happened, I should have been more vigilant, but sometimes people are strange. When you've been in a relationship for so long, even when you see red flags, you try to reassure yourself, telling yourself, you're just overthinking things. It wasn't until 2 days before my business trip that I truly felt something was wrong in the house, as if a storm had gathered just above the roof, waiting for me to turn my back before breaking. That day, as I was sitting at the dining table reviewing my travel itinerary, Brenda unexpectedly walked over, placed a glass of water in front of me, and started asking questions. Her tone seemed caring on the surface, but the more I listened, the stranger it felt. She was so thorough, it made me look up at her. How many days will you be gone? Are you taking a morning or evening flight? Which hotel are you staying at? Are you sure you won't be coming back in the middle of it? She fired off the questions one after another, not in a casual, conversational way, but as if she needed to know my every move. I smiled faintly and gave a vague answer, saying it would be about 2 days, but the schedule could change depending on work. Hearing that, Brenda immediately pressed further. So you'll be staying there every night? No surprise returns, right? That question made me pause. I looked at her. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a glint of something I couldn't quite name. I just nodded to end the glint of journalistic/an conversation, not saying anything more. A seed of suspicion was planted in my mind, though I couldn't yet connect the dots. It wasn't just Brenda. Ethan was different that day too. Normally, when I went away for a few days, he'd just grunt in acknowledgement, rarely asking for details or showing concern. But this time, he was the one who insisted I should go on the trip without any worries. Everything at home is taken care of, he said. He even sent me a strange text. Don't worry about the house, Mom and Chloe. I might stop by for a bit, but I'll have help. Reading that message, I stared at the screen for a long time. Stop by for a bit sounded so casual, but I knew very well that when it came to my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, nothing was ever just a bit. On the afternoon I left, another small but memorable incident occurred. The security camera in our living room suddenly went offline. The system was usually very stable and had almost never had issues. I called Ethan to ask about it. He answered so quickly, it was as if he had a prepared response. The Wi-Fi is probably acting up. I'm busy right now. I'll check it tonight. His answer sounded normal, but something about it still felt wrong. When I was at the airport waiting to board, I called the building's technical support just to be sure. After checking, they confirmed that the internet connection to my unit was perfectly fine, with no error reports from their end. After hearing that, I was silent for a few seconds. If the internet was fine, then why did the camera go offline right as I was leaving? My stomach started to burn with a mix of anger and anxiety, but I tried not to jump to conclusions. I told myself maybe someone had unplugged it, maybe my husband forgot to plug it back in, or maybe it was just a coincidence. Even so, from that moment on, a sense of unease followed me on my entire journey. That night at the hotel, I texted Ethan first. I asked if he'd eaten dinner, if his mom was there, if everything was okay at home. It took a long time for him to reply, and when he did, His answers were strangely short. Yep, normal. You should get some sleep. Not a single question back, no words of care. Like usual. That wasn't the texting style of a husband at home going about his normal routine. It felt like someone who was busy hiding something or in the middle of a mess he didn't want to reveal. I tossed and turned almost all night. The next morning, as I was getting ready to meet a client, I received a text from the cleaning lady who worked on our bellman floor. She was a kind, honest woman I often chatted with in the hallway. Her message was short and direct. Did you guys get new baby furniture? I saw them, carrying in a bassinet and bags of newborn clothes yesterday afternoon. Reading that, my hands went cold. My heart felt like it had been struck a heavy blow. I sat on the edge of the bed and reread the message several times. A. Bassinet. Newborn clothes. Yesterday afternoon right after I had left. Everything clicked into place in my mind. Brenda's probing questions, Ethan's strange behavior, the disconnected camera, and Chloe's pestering about the house. Documents for months. I understood immediately, but I forced myself to remain calm. If I called and confronted them then, they would deny everything, clean up the evidence, and prepare their excuses. I didn't want an explanation. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. So, I didn't call. I didn't text my husband anything else. I just quietly opened my phone and changed my bus ticket to an earlier one. As I did, a chill spread through me. I had never felt so terrifyingly calm. No tears, no trembling, no blaming. My mind was just crystal clear, as if someone had just doused me with a bucket of ice water in the middle of a deep sleep. On the way back, I replayed the events of the past few months. The secretly photographed documents, the offline camera, my sister-in-law's constant questions about me being the homeowner. Ethan's evasiveness whenever I mentioned loans or paperwork. Everything connected into a clear line. I suddenly realized that if they simply wanted Chloe to move in to recover from childbirth, they wouldn't have needed to wait for me to be away. They wouldn't have needed to touch my filing cabinet, and they certainly wouldn't have needed to disable the security camera. At that moment, I felt both pain and anger, but strangely, my mind was sharper than ever. I told myself clearly, no crying, no making a scene from afar, and absolutely no tipping them off. Let them think I knew nothing. Let them play their entire hand. Only when people fully reveal their greed can you see their true faces. And just as I had suspected, when I pulled my suitcase to the front door of the home that afternoon, what awaited me behind that door was far worse than anything I had imagined on the long ride back. I stood in the middle of my bedroom, now transformed into a postpartum recovery room. I took in the scene, the bassinet by the window, the garish red floral bedding, the pile of baby bottles and burp cloths crowding my vanity. If this had been the me of a few years ago, I probably would have cried, argued, and demanded to know how they could do this. But no. After everything that had happened, my heart was colder than ice. I knew that the first person to lose their temper would be the first to lose. Quieter I was, the more I could see. I pulled my suitcase closer to the bed, opened my closet, and packed a few necessary outfits. Then, I gathered my personal documents, my laptop, a few USB drives with work files, and the backup hard drive I kept in the bottom drawer. I did everything slowly and methodically, as if preparing for a normal trip. It was probably this calmness that made them underestimate me. They thought I was having a childish fit, that I'd leave for a few days and then come back. I had no idea that the more I saw their true colors, the clearer my mind became. Chloe leaned against the closet, one hand smoothing her hair, her lips pursed in a provocative smirk. Watching me pack, she let out a small, contemptuous laugh. Don't be so dramatic. You're the daughter-in-law, but you act like you own the place. I'm only staying for a few months. I'm not stealing it from you, no. Need to look so murderous. Her words made me pause for a beat. I turned and looked directly at her. She was still wearing my robe, standing in my room, speaking with a tone that was half mocking, half challenging. I stared at her for a few seconds before replying with a single, quiet sentence. Some people enter a house through the close-in front door. Others use an excuse. The room fell silent. Chloe froze for a moment, likely not expecting me to be so direct. Even Ethan looked up at me, a flicker of guilt in his eyes. But a few Seconds later, Brenda jumped in as if she'd been stung. She stood blocking the section doorway, her voice sharp and sour. "Don't you dare talk in riddles. Your sister-in-law has been through a painful childbirth. It's a blessing for this. A house that she brought her baby here. As the daughter-in-law, you should be more considerate instead of putting on a sour face. If you want to leave, then leave. Let's see who needs who more. To be honest, this house will be just fine without you." Her voice grew sharper with every word. If this had been the old me, I might have tried to explain, to make her understand. But at that moment, I just found it laughable. The very people claiming they didn't need me were the ones who had taken advantage of my absence to clear my belongings out of my own room. I zipped up my suitcase. As I was about to leave, Ethan quickly stepped forward and grabbed my wrist. But the way he held me wasn't to keep me from leaving. It was to keep me from embarrassing him. His voice had no trace of softness, only a threatening edge. "Don't overreact, Ava. It's just about letting your sister stay for a few months. You're making it sound like a catastrophe. If people find out, they'll say our family is in turmoil because you're being petty." Hearing that, something inside me shattered completely. For years, I had thought that at the very least, this man knew right from wrong. But it turned out, even at this critical moment, all he cared about was what other people would think. I pulled my hand away from his grasp. The movement was gentle but firm. I looked at him and smiled, a smile that felt cold even to me. "Don't worry, I won't make a scene. I'm just giving your family the sense of ownership you all seem to crave." After I said that, I pulled my suitcase out the door. Behind me, Brenda let out a loud huff, as if she had just won a battle. Chloe, sitting on the edge of the bed, had a look of disgust on her face, but her lips curled into a smirk. Only Ethan stood there silently, not stopping me, not holding me back. At that moment, I understood clearly. In their eyes, whether I stayed or left didn't matter, as long as I didn't interfere with their plans. Just before I stepped out of the room, I glanced quickly at the filing cabinet, next to the vanity. Under the yellow lamplight, I could clearly see a faint, unfamiliar handprint on the drawer face. The stack of old photocopies I had intentionally left behind had a few pages missing. It all happened in a flash, but it was enough. I had no more doubts. They weren't just clearing a room for a new mother. While I was away, they had been rummaging through my legal documents. And once you touch property papers, this is no longer just a mother-in-law versus daughter-in-law conflict. I left the condo that night. No one saw me off. No one called after me. The apartment building's hallway felt unusually long and cold. Standing in the .4 elevator, I saw my reflection in the stainless steel doors and felt like I was looking at a stranger. No tears, no trembling, just eyes that were brighter than usual. As if I had finally, truly woken up from a marriage I had been trying to lull myself through for too long. When I arrived at my parents' house, my mother opened the door. The moment she saw me with my suitcase, her face went pale. "My goodness, what happened?" My dad came out from the living room, not even having time to put on his slippers. I stood in the entryway, looked at them, and said just one thing: "I'm not divorced yet." But tonight, I saw the true face of his entire family. My mother was stunned, quickly pulling me inside. She didn't press me with questions, just hurried to make me a bowl of hot soup. As I sat at the familiar, old wooden table, I felt a sting in my nose. Not because I felt sorry for myself, but because for the first time in years, I was in a place where I didn't have to be on guard against anyone. Later that night, after my parents were asleep, I sat alone in my old room. I opened my laptop and logged into the cloud storage system where I kept all my laps. Important files. I checked every folder, every sync notification, every confirmation email. And then, just as I suspected, my heart sank. I found an electronic verification request related to a home equity loan application sent to my backup email that very afternoon. The application was initiated by a financial services office I had never been to, never worked with, and had never even heard of. I stared at the screen for a few minutes, so it was clear. They hadn't just cleared out a room. They had gone much further than I had imagined. I didn't cry anymore. I took my phone, screenshotted all the alerts, saved the access logs, and sent everything to Olivia, my best friend who worked as a paralegal and was the person I trusted most. I sent her a single text. I think I'm going to need your help tomorrow. This isn't simple anymore. Near dawn, following Olivia's instructions, I submitted an urgent request to place a fraud alert and freeze the title verification on my property. Around 7 a.m., just as I had managed to get a little sleep, my phone on the nightstand began to vibrate incessantly. I picked it up. The screen was lit up with a long list of missed calls. The caller was Brenda. I scrolled down. 1 call, 2, 10, 20, 30. The count finally stopped at 47. I watched the screen light up and go dark, light up and go dark. And for the first time after a long night, I genuinely smiled, because I knew that on the other end of that line, something very big had just happened. The phone on my nightstand continued to buzz, as if the person on the other end, they was going mad with impatience. I sat up, leaning against the headboard, watching the name Brenda flash on and off the screen. 47 missed calls, interspersed with a flood of frantic texts, each one reeking of panic. Ava, pick up the phone! Where are you? Something terrible has happened. Get home right now. In the past, seeing so many calls from my mother-in-law would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety. I would have worried something had happened at home, something was wrong with Ethan, or that I was failing in my duties as a daughter-in-law. But that morning, watching the screen flash, I felt only a cold, clear-headed calm. Just last night, this was the same woman who had blocked my bedroom door, her voice dripping with contempt as she told me the right of way. House would be just fine without me. And now, just one night later, her tone had completely changed. What could possibly be so terrible that she would call me as if she were begging for help? I let it ring a few more times. I wanted the person on the other end to know what it felt like to be ignored. I wanted them to taste a fraction of the feeling they had forced on me last night. Only when the ringing stopped did I finally call back. My voice was so steady it surprised even me. Hello? You? Called a lot. Is something wrong? There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then Brenda's voice erupted, rushed and shrill, clearly in a state of panic. All the condescending authority from the previous night was gone. Get home right now. There are people here trying to put a lien on the house. Hearing that, a chill ran down my spine, but I kept my voice even. I asked, again, deliberately slowly, a lien on my house? Who would dare? Brenda nearly shrieked in desperation. Not your house, Ethan's house. They say there's a home equity loan application. They're standing in the living room. Right now. I clutched the phone tighter. That statement was a confession, so it was true. They had used my property documents. It wasn't a suspicion or a guess anymore. It was a cold, hard fact. For a few seconds, I could hear my own heart pounding, but my mind was crystal clear. All the scattered pieces from the past few days clicked perfectly into place. I sat up straighter. Who is the applicant on the loan, Brenda? My question made her falter. I could hear her ragged breathing. A moment later, she answered, but her voice was evasive. Well, it's all family. Just get home, and we can talk. Now is not the time for an interrogation. I let out a dry laugh, but it was silent. Family. It was only when they were in trouble that they remembered I was family. Last night, when they were clearing my belongings from my bedroom, when they were rummaging through my documents, when my husband held my wrist like I was a troublemaker, did any of them consider me family? I leaned back against the wall, my voice turning sharp. If it's family, then you probably don't need me. Whoever's name is on the house can deal with it. This time, Brenda had no pride left to cling to. Her voice cracked as she yelled into the phone, if you don't come back, I'm telling you, this family is finished. They're saying there's a problem with the paperwork and they're threatening to call the police if we don't cooperate. Ava, stop being difficult. And get over here now. I didn't answer immediately. I listened closely. On her end, besides Brenda's voice, I could hear Ethan's muffled words and a baby crying Chloe's, no doubt. The sound of frantic footsteps, a cabinet door slamming shut, and a firm male voice saying, we've already explained the situation. If you cooperate, this will go much faster. Those sounds were enough to paint a vivid picture. My mother, in-law in a panic, my husband pale with fear, my sister-in-law crying with her baby, and a few strangers standing in the living room, holding a file and asking questions. The house they had so triumphantly claimed as their own last night had become a beta scene of utter chaos this morning. I closed my eyes for a second, then said very softly, "I'm at my parents' house. If you want me to come back, fine, but first answer one question for me. Are any of my documents in that loan application?" I didn't ask because I needed to know. I already had the answer. I asked to hear her say it, or at least to hear her squirm. And just as I expected, she went silent. That heavy, damning silence was more telling than any confession. After a moment, she snapped, "What does it matter now? Just get over here and we'll talk." I said nothing more. I hung up the phone decisively. The room was quiet again, with only the gentle whir of the ceiling fan and the chirping of sparrows outside. But inside me, things were far from calm. I knew that from this moment on, the story had taken a different turn. This was no longer about an Anastasia, overbearing mother-in-law, a sister-in-law taking over a room, or a weak-willed husband. This had crossed a line, one that, once crossed, there was no turning, back from property, legal documents, and the clear signs of fraud. Just then, my door opened slightly. Olivia walked in. She had come over first, thing in the morning after I texted her. She was sharp, direct, and never wasted words. Seeing my expression, she didn't beat around the bush. She sat on the edge of my desk. "Give me the phone." I handed it to her and recounted the entire conversation, word for word. After listening, Olivia's face turned grim. She said only one short, sharp sentence. "This isn't a family issue anymore, Ava. This is property fraud." I sat in silence. Her words hammered into my brain. For years, I had used the plain Shannon word patience to keep my family together, but now I understood. There are some things that the more you tolerate, the more people will take. And once they dared to touch my property documents behind my back, if I showed any more weakness, the only one who would end up with nothing was me. I gripped my phone, looking at the now silent screen after the morning's frantic calls. Then I looked up at Olivia, my voice calm but firm. "Fine. If they want to play this game, then this time I'm not backing down." After I said that, the room was quiet for a few seconds. Olivia didn't reply. Immediately. She studied me for a long time, as if to make sure I was truly clear-headed, not just a woman lashing out after being wronged by her in-laws, still half wanting to hold on and half wanting to let go. Then, she pulled a chair closer, opened my laptop, and said concisely, "Show me everything you've found." I took a deep breath, opened my email, and pulled up a folder of documents I hadn't shown anyone. It was a draft of a sales agreement for the condo, along with email exchanges with a real estate agent and photos of a new house I had secretly been looking at. Olivia read through it, then looked up at me, her expression changing. "Ava, you were really planning to sell the house?" I nodded, a bitter feeling rising in my chest. Yes, I had been planning to sell to it, not to leave in anger, but to start over properly. This business trip wasn't just about work. My itinerary included a private meeting with the real estate agent that afternoon. I had prepared everything meticulously, the legal paperwork, financial projections, even viewing 2 other larger, brighter condos in a quieter new development. I had calculated that if I sold the old place, combined with my savings, I could easily afford a bigger, nicer home. I had dreamed of my husband and me moving out on our own, free from his mother's constant intrusions, free from suffocating family dinners, free from the feeling of having to tiptoe around in my own home. I had wanted to make it a surprise for Ethan. A real surprise. I thought that maybe if we lived alone, he would change. Maybe some distance from his mother would help our marriage breathe. Maybe if I tried just one more time, I still save it. Even right before I left, I had sat alone, looking at pictures of the new house, imagining the look on his face when he found out. I pictured him, being surprised, then happy, then hugging me and saying, "Thank you for thinking of us." But it turned out that while I was planning to give him a better home, he and his family were planning to take the one I already had. Just thinking about it sent a deep chill through me. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was the feeling of having my trust completely torn apart. I was trying to give them a more comfortable life, and they had preempted me in the most despicable way. Olivia placed her hand on the stack of documents, her voice low. So they knew? About your plan. I sat silently for a few seconds. Her words opened a door in my mind. Yes. It wasn't a coincidence that they decided to tamper with the house papers right at this moment. They knew. They knew the house was about to be sold. They knew I was planning to move. And they knew that once I sold it, they would lose any chance of getting their hands on it. I quickly recalled all the small details I had previously dismissed. The times Ethan held my phone for an unusually long time, pretending to check the time. The times he'd asked casually, "The value of our condo must have gone up a lot, huh?" Or the day he stood behind me while I was texting the real estate agent and said with a laugh, "What are you so busy with that you have to be so secretive?" I even remembered one evening he had probed, "If we ever sell this place, we'd make a ton of money, right?" At the time, I had just smiled, noncommittally. Looking back, none of those words were accidental. I looked up at Olivia, my lips dry. They didn't guess, Olivia. They were spying. On me. The moment the words left my mouth, I shuddered. It was the only way it all made sense. They knew I was about to sell the house. They rushed Chloe in. They disabled the camera right when I left. They went through my papers and then pushed through the home equity loan application. It wasn't about compassion for a new mother. It was about stopping me, or at least getting money out of the house before it was no longer in their grasp. Olivia nodded slowly. She thought for a moment, then said with certainty, "If that's the case, there's only one possibility. They need money, urgently. And the fastest way to get it is to use this house as collateral before you have a person a chance to sell it." I felt a chill run down my spine. Urgently needed money, yes. If it were just ordinary greed, they wouldn't have been so reckless as to forge documents when they weren't even sure they could get away with it. People only act so hastily and sloppily when they're cornered by debt. I sat still, looking down at my hands. For months, I had thought the conflicts in our home were just the usual family drama. An overbearing mother-in-law, a mooching sister-in-law, a spineless husband. But it turned out there was a darker, more dangerous undercurrent. They weren't just trying to bully me for satisfaction. They were trying to use my assets to solve a crisis I hadn't yet fully seen. I let out a bitter laugh that sounded harsh even to my own ears. I was going to give them a better life, Olivia, and they were going to take my house. Olivia didn't offer any comforting words. She just looked at me directly, her expression clear and sober. Your biggest mistake wasn't trusting them, it was letting them know what you had and what you were planning to do. Her words felt like a heavy weight on my chest. It was true. It wasn't that I was too naive to see their faults. It was that I was so accustomed to yielding, so used to thinking that family problems could be resolved slowly, that I forgot. Some people, the moment they know you have something, will find a way to get their hands on it. I sat up straight and slowly closed my laptop. Until now, a part of me was still weighed down by the exhaustion of betrayal and having my life turned upside down. But at that moment, that feeling vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I stood up, pushed my chair in, and my voice was calm, but every word was distinct. Fine. If they want to play hardball, then this time, I'll see it through to the end. Olivia looked at me and nodded slightly. Outside, the morning sun was bright. And inside me, the last shred of softness I had for that marriage had just been extinguished. Around 10 a.m., I changed my clothes, tied my hair back neatly, and left the house with Olivia. But I wasn't going back as a wife seeking an explanation. I was going back as someone who knew exactly what she held in her hands and knew, with absolute certainty, that if I softened even once more, the price I'd pay, I wouldn't be just a room, but my entire life. Olivia walked beside me, and with us was a third person, Mr. Thompson, an attorney she knew. On the way, he gave me one piece of advice. When we get there, don't argue. First, Just let them talk. The more frantic someone is, the more they reveal. I nodded. To be honest, my heart was pounding. Despite being prepared, the act of walking back into the home I had built to confront my husband, mother-in-law, and sister-in-law under these circumstances was undeniably painful. But this time, the pain didn't make me weak. It made me sharp. The moment the apartment door opened, I saw two unfamiliar men standing in the living room. One was in his 40s, wearing a white shirt tucked into black slacks, holding a thick file. The other was younger, standing by the dining table, talking on the phone while scanning the apartment as if assessing its condition. Brenda was pacing between the living room and kitchen, her face drained of all color. The second she saw me, she rushed forward, her voice sharp, with habit but trembling with fear. "Where have you been? They've been waiting. Since this morning." I didn't respond to her accusation. I walked fully into the apartment, set my purse on a chair, and looked directly at the two strangers. "Who filed the home equity loan application for this property?" The room went silent for a beat. They probably hadn't expected me to cut straight to the chase. No small talk, no arguing with my mother-in-law as they might have anticipated. The older man stepped forward, his voice maintaining a placed, professional tone but less rigid than before. "We're from the financial services firm. Mr. Ethan Hayes submitted an application. The file includes a power of attorney from you, so we're here to verify." Hearing that, I laughed. Not a happy laugh, but the kind of laugh you let out when you hear something so brazenly false. You don't know whether to be angry or disgusted first. I took out my phone, opened the email alert I had screenshotted that morning, and held the screen up to his face. "What power of attorney?" "The one with my forged signature on it?" As soon as I said that, the air in the room seemed to vanish. Brenda froze. Chloe, who had been sitting in the bedroom holding her baby, rushed out, her face ashen. And Ethan, standing by the entryway closet, let his hands fall to his sides, his lips pressed into a thin, white line. He couldn't look me in the plus. I turned to my husband and asked slowly, each word clear enough for everyone in the house to hear. "When did you sign this?" Ethan swallowed hard, his eyes blinking rapidly. After a few seconds, he stammered, I was just going to borrow a little money to help Chloe out. She's in a tough spot. Once things stabilized, we were going to pay it back. I never intended." I didn't let him finish. I snatched the file from the man's hand and slammed it down on the coffee table with a loud thud. "You were going to use my house as collateral for a temporary loan without asking me a single question?" Chloe's baby shrieked, startled by the noise, but no one had the mind to soothe him. Chloe took a step forward, tears streaming down her face, her voice high-pitched as if trying to use her crying to cover the truth. "Ava, don't make a big deal out of this. I just needed some money for my son's medical bills. I'll get it back to you in a few days." I whipped my head around to face her. In my mind, I saw her standing in my robe last night, smiling as if nothing was wrong. I looked her straight in the eyes, my gaze ice cold. "Did you need money or did you need this house?" She froze. Just for a second, but I saw the flash of guilt in her eyes. Brenda immediately jumped in, trying to regain control. "Whatever borrowing happened, it's between family. Don't act like a stranger. This is your husband's house. Who do you think you're trying to scare?" This time, it wasn't me who spoke. It was Mr. Thompson. He took a step forward, opened his briefcase, and produced a copy of the property deed. His voice was calm but firm. "Excuse me, ma'am, but this property is legally owned by Miss Ava Collins. We have reviewed the file. The power of attorney in this loan application shows signs of a forged signature and the unauthorized use of legal documents. If you proceed with this transaction on this basis, we will file an official report and forward this case for criminal investigation." Hearing that, the two men from the financial firm exchanged a look. Their initial confidence evaporated. The older man took back the file, flipped through a few pages, and asked me again, his voice no longer so sure. "So you confirm? You absolutely did not sign this power of attorney?" I looked him straight in the eye and answered concisely, "I have never signed it, never agreed to it, and have never authorized anyone to use my property." documents to borrow a single dollar. That answer was like a knife cutting the last rope my in-laws were clinging to. Brenda staggered and fell onto the sofa. Ethan reached out to steady his mother, but he was trembling himself. Chloe, holding her baby, slowly backed towards the bedroom door, her face white, muttering something under her breath. The two men from the firm began to pack up their papers, their demeanor shifting from assertive to wary. In just a few short minutes, the room that had been filled with entitlement and pressure had become a suffocating space of chaos and fear, and I knew, from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. I thought that was it. I thought that once I denied the signature and the financial firm withdrew the application, I would just have to confront Ethan and settle things. But no. While the air in the living room was still thick with panic, the older man from the financial firm cleared his throat, still holding the file to his chest. He looked at me, then at Ethan, his voice slowing as if he were weighing his words. Actually, there's something I think you need to know. The primary person who contacted us from the beginning wasn't Mr. Hayes. I turned sharply, my entire body tensing. Then who was it? I asked, my voice not loud, but sharp enough to make the entire room hold its breath. The man didn't answer right away. He just tilted his head slightly, his gaze drifting to the right. Following his line of sight, my eyes landed on Chloe. She was cowering in the bedroom doorway, one hand holding her baby, the other clutching the hem of her shirt so tightly it was wrinkled. The man said slowly, "It was her." The moment he said it, the room froze. Even Chloe's baby seemed to choke back a cry before letting out an even more piercing wail, as if he too could feel the terrifying atmosphere spreading through the room. Chloe's jaw dropped, her eyes wide with terror, and then she shrieked as if she'd been burned. "What are you talking about? Don't you dare lie and blame me!" Her voice was shrill, a mix of fear and fury, like someone whose last mask had just been ripped away. But the man no longer had the same polite demeanor. Now that he knew the application was fraudulent, he likely realized he'd be in trouble if he continued to cover for them. He took out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and held it up. "We don't just make claims. Here are the call logs, the text exchanges, and the recorded phone conversations. Your number, ma'am, called us far more than Mr. Hayes's. You were the one who sent the initial photos of the documents." I stood frozen, watching him, a chill creeping up my spine. He played a short audio clip. After a few seconds of static, a woman's voice emerged, sharp and fast. It was so familiar I could recognize it with my eyes closed. "The house is in my sister-in-law's name, but I have a way to get the paperwork. You just get the application ready. When I give the word, you need to push it through quickly. If we wait too long, she's going to sell it, and then the whole thing is off." No one in the room moved. I heard every single word, each one feeling like a knife slicing into the most foolish part of my own heart. So, Chloe wasn't just a follower. She wasn't just going along with someone else's plan, she was the initiator, the one pulling the strings, the one who had sat somewhere, using the same sweet voice she used to call me sister-in-law, to plot a way to take my house. Brenda whipped her head around to face her daughter, her face ashen. She stammered, her voice trembling. "Chloe, what? What did you do?" It was the first time all morning I had heard genuine fear in her voice, not just the usual bluster she used to dominate others. But her fear wasn't out of sympathy for me, or because she realized her own wrongdoing. It was because she now understood that this had escalated beyond a family matter they could handle behind closed doors. Chloe clutched her baby tighter, tears streaming down her face, but her eyes still held a defiant, bitter glint. "I did it for this family. I don't want to be a divorced single mom living in a rented apartment." I was desperate. What else was I supposed to do? She spoke in a rushed torrent, as if shouting would make her less culpable. I burst out laughing, a dry, cold, hollow sound. "So you decided to just take my house to solve your problems?" I asked. My question made her stop. She didn't answer, but her silence was a confession. Just then, Ethan, as if pushed to his limit, exploded. He turned to his sister, his eyes bloodshot, his voice cracking. "You told me it was just a temporary loan. You never said you were going to forge documents. You said we'd pay it. Back in a few weeks, you never said it would come to this. I looked at my husband, unsure whether to feel pity or contempt. Even now, he was trying to cast himself as a victim, as if his hand hadn't signed the papers, as if his complicit silence wasn't his own responsibility. But Chloe wasn't about to let him get off so easily. She screamed back at him, completely losing control. You signed it, didn't you? Don't you pretend to be? So noble. Without your signature, do you think I could have done anything? You were the one who said Ava was about to sell the house, and we had to act fast. Before she did. Now that it's all blown up, you're trying to pin it all on me? Every word was an accusation hurled like a rock. I stood there listening, horrified. When they had no escape route left, family members turned on each other faster than hungry dogs fighting over a scrap of meat. Brenda frantically tried to get between them, but the more she tried, the more chaotic it became. She pulled Ethan's arm, then turned to yell at Chloe to shut up, her voice a mix of anger and fear. The baby in Chloe's arms wailed nonstop. The two men from the financial firm stood frozen, their faces pale, clearly shocked that a routine document verification had devolved into a raw, shameless confession session. I looked at the three of them, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, my husband. None of them were innocent. One paved the way, one masterminded the plot, and one closed his eyes and signed his name. But amidst the ugly truth that had just been exposed, I still had a nagging feeling. Everything had happened too smoothly, too desperately, too quickly. A person like Chloe, even if she was greedy and reckless, didn't seem smart enough to orchestrate every step on her own. There had to be something else. Another hand pushing things forward at this breakneck pace. I didn't voice my thoughts. I just clenched my fists, stood tall amidst the chaos, and knew with chilling certainty that this wasn't the final revelation. This was just the first time their true faces had been dragged into the light. Just as that thought crossed my mind, the doorbell rang a short, firm press, not the hesitant ring of a stranger who might have the wrong address. The chaotic room froze for a beat. Brenda turned to look at the door, her already pale face turning even whiter. Ethan frowned, probably thinking it was more people from the financial firm. But Chloe, upon hearing the bell, flinched instinctively. She clutched her baby so tightly that he let out another piercing cry. Before anyone could answer, the door was pushed open from the outside. A tall, thin man in a gray shirt walked in. His face was gaunt, but his eyes were sharp. He didn't linger on anyone, just swept his gaze across the room at the file on the table, at the two bewildered loan officers, and finally, his eyes landed on Chloe. A cold, contemptuous smirk touched his lips. Well, look at this. A full house. His voice was raspy but clear. Good. I'm here to get my money back. I had never seen this man before, but one look at Chloe's face, instantly, drained of all color, told me who he was, and I was right. Chloe stumbled back a step, her face ashen. She held her baby and trembled, her voice barely a whisper. David, what are you doing here? Her question was laughable. She wasn't asking out of surprise, but with the thepeople.org. Terror of someone whose carefully hidden secret had just been exposed in front of everyone. The man, David, didn't answer right away. He took 2 more steps into the house, pulled a thick stack of papers from his jacket pocket, and threw it onto the back glass coffee table. The papers fanned out with a dry, rustling sound. The $60,000 you borrowed from me before you took our son and ran. Back to your mommies, he said, his eyes still fixed on Chloe. I gave you a month. Time's up. The air in the room was sucked out. I stood there, staring at the papers on the table, and suddenly, everything became blindingly clear. This was the root of it. All. It wasn't a few dollars for baby formula or medical bills like Chloe had tearfully claimed. It wasn't a temporary hardship. It was a massive debt, enough to drive someone to desperation. And that debt was the real noose tightening around this family's neck, making them so reckless they dared to touch my property documents. Chloe stammered, her lips trembling uncontrollably. I'll pay you back. Just give me a little more time. Her voice was a pathetic whimper, a world away from the brazen woman who had mocked me in my bedroom last night. But David just sneered, a short, chilling sound. Pay me back with what? He tilted his head, his voice dripping with sarcasm. With this house? Or did you think you were the only one who came up with that brilliant idea? His words hit Ethan like a sledgehammer. He whipped his head around to look at his sister, his expression a mixture of horror and fury. Brenda's jaw hung open, her hand gripping the edge of the sofa, trembling. I slowly turned to look at Chloe. Now, all the final pieces fit together. I asked very quietly, but each word was as sharp as a razor's edge. So you weren't just trying to borrow my house. You were running from a debt. Chloe opened her mouth but couldn't speak. Her face was a picture of utter despair, stripped of all her usual arrogance. All that was left was a woman, cornered, grasping at anything in front of her, even her sister-in-law's home. Brenda collapsed back onto the sofa as if her bones had turned to jelly. She clutched her chest, her eyes wide with disbelief as she stared at her daughter. Her voice a pathetic stutter. Oh my God, you hid this from me. It was the first time all morning that I had heard her speak without a trace of her usual condescension, but I didn't feel any satisfaction. I just felt a bitter emptiness, because it turned out that all their schemes forcing me out of my room, clearing out my things, disabling the camera, and stealing my documents were not impulsive acts. They had a goal from the very beginning, and that goal was a sum of money so large that they were willing to sell off kinship, honor, and all sense of right and wrong to get it. David then turned to look at me. His gaze wasn't friendly, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the look of a man exhausted from chasing what was rightfully his. He spoke directly, without any pretense. You're the homeowner, right? If you're not involved in this, you'd better sue them immediately, otherwise this whole family is going down. His words made me pause. I looked at him for a few seconds. His tone wasn't that of someone here to cause trouble. It was the tone of someone who knew exactly where the quicksand was, who had stepped in it, and who knew that if you didn't get out fast, you'd be pulled under with them. One of the men from the financial firm turned pale upon hearing the figure of $60,000. The other bent down, picked up a few of the scattered papers, glanced at them, and then they exchanged a look of clear alarm. Ethan started breathing heavily, his eyes darting between his sister, me, and the debt papers on the table, as if he was only just now realizing how deep a hole he had stepped into. And Chloe, holding her son, slumped to the floor, her hair disheveled, muttering something incomprehensible. The already suffocating living room felt like it was being squeezed even tighter. Each person stood in their own corner, yet they were all bound by the blank but same thread of panic. I stood silently in the middle of it all, looking at each of them in turn. The husband I once thought I could lean on, the mother-in-law who constantly preached about family values, the sister-in-law who cried about her struggles to hide her greed and her debts. And now, a stranger had walked in and thrown the people.com unvarnished truth onto the table, like a stone dropped into a murky pond, splashing everything to the surface, leaving nothing hidden. I suddenly felt no hesitation, no lingering thought of, we're family, let's talk this out. Some things, once they cross the line of basic decency, the more you yield, the more you lose. I took a deep breath and stood up straight. I looked at my husband, my mother-in-law, and my sister-in-law, and I said decisively, each word landing like a hammer blow. Fine. From now on, this is no longer a family matter. My words hung in the air, and the room fell into a thick, suffocating silence. The arguments stopped. Brenda's nagging, Chloe's manipulative crying, Ethan's evasive excuses, all of it ceased. It was as if they all simultaneously realized that we had crossed the boundary they had used to intimidate me for years. The present idea that family problems should be handled behind closed doors. I looked at David first. He was leaning against the table, hands in his pockets, his expression a mixture of coldness and exhaustion. He was clearly a man who had been dragged through too much drama to bother with pretense. Then, I slowly let my gaze sweep over my husband's family. Brenda sat slumped in her chair, clutching her chest. Chloe was on the floor, her hair a mess, trembling as she held her son. Ethan stood like a statue by the entryway closet, his face as white as a sheet. My voice was so calm that its very calmness was unnerving. Do you all think? This is the first I'm hearing of this? Ethan frowned, His eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and a dawning sense of dread. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice hoarse. All the aggressive bravado from the night before was gone. Now, he just looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, finally realizing his footing had slipped long ago. I didn't answer him right away. I took out my phone, opened a pre-saved folder, and held the screen up for everyone to see. "I heard this 3 weeks ago." I pressed play on the audio file. After a moment of faint static, Chloe's voice emerged, sharp and undeniable. "All we need is a copy of the deed and a signature sample, and we can get the application started. You get everything. Ready on your end? I'll find a way to get what we need." Hearing her own words, Chloe looked as if she'd been scalded. She jerked her head up, her eyes wide with terror, her lips trembling. You were spying on me?" Her voice cracked, losing all its previous shrillness and feigned victimhood. I looked directly at her and smirked. "No, you were just talking too loud." My reply was simple, but in that room it landed like a knife. I remembered it. Clearly, Chloe had been on the balcony, talking on the phone, thinking no one was paying attention. I was in my home office with the door slightly ajar. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. She was the one who had spoken so recklessly, so confidently, that she had laid all her intentions bare. At the time, I have enough proof to confront her, so I had quietly recorded it. I never imagined that her own arrogance and greed would be the very thing that saved me. I stopped the recording and swiped to a series of screenshots. And this is the access alert from my backup email. This is the login history for my cloud storage. The timestamps match perfectly with when I was on my business trip. And this, I swiped one last time, is the confirmation that I submitted a fraud alert and a request to freeze my property title before your financial firm could process the loan. Each image, each timestamp, each line of confirmation on my phone screen was like a hammer blow, striking each of them one by one. Mr. Thompson, who had been standing beside me, stepped forward. His voice remained even, but it carried a chilling authority. My client had already filed to freeze the property title and reported suspected fraud. This means Miss Collins not only did not consent to this transaction, but she actively took steps to prevent it the moment she detected irregularities. In short, the reason your application was blocked today was not due to a technicality. It was because the rightful owner intervened first. The man from the financial firm's face changed completely. He looked down at his papers, then back at me with a newfound wariness. It was clear that we understood he had walked into a situation far more complicated than he had initially thought. I looked directly at Ethan. It was the coldest look I had ever given him, so cold that it felt foreign even to me. I spoke slowly, as if carving each word into his mind. In other words, this wasn't a trap I fell into. It was a trap I let all of you walk into. Ethan stumbled back a step, his face a mask of shock and wounded pride, as if even now he wanted to believe he was just an innocent victim. You were testing me," he stammered. His question was so pathetic it made me want to laugh and be sick at the same time. "Testing you? A husband who was truly decent wouldn't need to be tested to prove he wouldn't betray his wife." I looked at him without a shred of my former softness. "No, I was giving you a choice." I paused, then continued, my words light but cutting. "And you chose to betray me." That sentence left Ethan speechless. He opened his mouth as if to argue, to explain, but no words came out. Because at this point, he had burned every bridge himself. The signature was his, the complicit silence was his, the tacit approval for his sister to rifle through his wife's legal documents was his. No, one had forced him. David, who had been watching from the side, let out a dry, harsh laugh. He shook his head, looking at the scene before him as if it were a cheap circus act. "Well, this is great," he said. "I thought I was here to collect a debt. Turns out I came to watch a play." His words were casual but deeply humiliating, because it was the truth. An outsider had walked in and watched as every mask in this family was ripped away. The living room became tense as a drawn bowstring. All sounds seemed to fade, except for Brenda's ragged breathing, the baby's occasional hiccup, and the loud, rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. No one dared to look at me as the meek woman who had quietly dragged her suitcase out the door last night. At that moment, everyone understood one thing very clearly. The game had completely changed. I didn't say another word. I just turned to Mr. Thompson and gave a slight nod. It was a tiny gesture, but to everyone in that room, it sounded like a heavy door locking behind them. Mr. Thompson understood immediately. He took out his phone, stepped away from the coffee table, and made a brief call. His voice was as calm as ever, but every word was chillingly clear. Yes, we're requesting assistance to file an Enexpadens Platen Adeklang official report regarding suspected document forgery, unauthorized use of property records, and attempted fraud in a home equity loan transaction. The from the transli entered anonen slashen. Property owner is present at the scene. The moment she heard that, Brenda looked as if she'd been doused with ice water. She shot up from her seat, rushing towards me so fast she nearly tripped over the table. Her face was contorted, her voice trembling as she tried to force a softness I hadn't heard from her in years. Honey, let's just talk this out. We're all family. Why do we have to make it so serious and call the authorities? Let's just sit down and talk. I'll make him apologize to you. I turned to look at her. Just one look, but my heart felt nothing. I cut her off, my voice not loud or harsh, just a simple question. When you were clearing my things out of my room, did you consider me family? Brenda froze on the spot. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Because she knew there was no decent answer to that question. If she had considered me family, she wouldn't have waited until I was gone to throw my belongings out, like trash. If she had considered me family, she wouldn't have stood blocking my quote door, sneering that the house would be just fine without me. Suddenly, Chloe dropped her baby onto the sofa and fell to her knees on the floor. It happened so fast it even took me by surprise. She was actually kneeling, her hands clasped together, tears streaming down her blotchy face, looking utterly pathetic. Ava, please forgive me this one time. I was wrong. I was just so desperate. That's why I did it. Please, for the sake of us being family, let this go. If I get in trouble for this, my son's life will be ruined. The words poured out of her, sounding so pitiful. But I had seen her true face, too clearly. Her tears no longer moved me. They just disgusted me. I took a step back, out of her reach, and said coldly, "You didn't make one mistake. You made a series of calculated choices." My words made her freeze. She looked up at me, her red-rimmed eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe I could be so ruthless. But it was the truth. Someone who makes a single mistake usually feels shame. But she had systematically gone from taking my personal items and borrowing money she never intended to repay, to snooping through my files and forging legal documents. That wasn't a misstep. It was a conspiracy. It was then that Ethan seemed to snap out of his daze. He rushed towards me, his trembling hand reaching for mine out of old habit, as if just touching me could make everything better. Ava, I was wrong. I just wanted to help my sister. I never thought it would turn out like this. His voice was small and hoarse, a far cry from his threatening tone the night before. But I jerked my hand away instantly. The movement wasn't forceful, but it was so decisive it stopped him in his tracks. I looked him straight in the eyes, each word landing with the clarity of the ticking clock. You helped your sister by putting your wife's property on the line. Ethan was speechless. I saw his lips tremble, his throat moving as he swallowed, but he couldn't form a coherent sentence. Because at this point, any explanation was worthless. He could say he loved his sister, that he was pressured, that he didn't think it through. But the signature on the application was his. His complicit silence was his. His so-called helping family was, in reality, sacrificing what belonged to his wife to save his own. Just then, the doorbell rang again. This time, no one rushed to open it. The family just stood frozen, staring at the door as if it were some dreaded fate approaching. Mr. Thompson went to the door. A few seconds later, 2 city officials and another man in a blue shirt with an official ID badge walked in. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. If before it had been a chaotic mix of family arguments, begging, and blame-shifting, from that moment on, it officially became something else. Serious, cold, and with no room for theatrical tears. A middle-aged official stood in the center of the room and asked concisely, "Who is the owner of this property?" I stepped forward and handed my ID and a copy of my file to Mr. Thompson, who passed it to them. The man with the ID badge took the papers, quickly, cross-referenced them, and nodded. Mr. Thompson immediately began to explain the situation, from the unauthorized use of documents and the suspected forged signature to the attempt to use an asset not owned by the loan applicant as collateral. He spoke calmly and clearly, each point concise and relevant. The more he spoke, the grayer Brenda's face became. Chloe sat on the floor, trembling as she held her son, and Ethan didn't even dare to lift his head. After listening, the city official turned and asked a direct question. Who was directly responsible for preparing this application? The question hung in the air. No one answered, but the silence couldn't hide the truth. All eyes, including those of the men from the financial firm, first darted to Chloe and then slowly shifted to Ethan. One was the architect, the other was the accomplice. No one said it, but everyone knew. Chloe clutched her son tighter, her lips moving as if she was about to start, crying again. Ethan took a half step back, as if he wanted to merge with the Pruslam-on-a-7.com wall behind him. Brenda covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes darting between her son and daughter, as if only now realizing that the game she thought they could handle in-house had become a public matter that could no longer be contained. I stood in the middle of that room, hearing the crisp click of a pen on the first page of an official report, and my heart suddenly felt still. The fiery anger was gone, replaced by a clear, cold certainty. There was no going back. From that very moment, this family had officially entered the realm of the law. The moment the report was opened and the pen touched the paper, Chloe, as if cornered, shot to her feet. The baby in her arms almost slipped, if not for Brenda rushing to catch him. But instead of holding her son tighter or staying put, she whirled on Ethan, her eyes bloodshot, her finger pointing directly at her brother's face. Her voice cracked with a mixture of panic and rage. He signed it. He agreed to it. It wasn't just me. The accusation exploded in the living room like a firecracker, tearing apart the plans like NUX, last shred of their family facade. Ethan flinched, his expression twisting, and, a second later, he roared back the first time he had lost his meek composure all morning. "You're the one who came up with it. I only trusted you. You said it was temporary, that we could cancel it after signing. You told me it would be fine. That's the only reason I..." Before he could finish, Chloe cut him off with a shrill scream. "And you're innocent? You were the one who said Ava was about to sell the house and we had to act fast before she finalized the sale. Do you think I just made that up?" The room erupted. The siblings tore into each other right in front of the room. Officials, the loan officers, David and me. Without any prompting, every word they threw at each other peeled back another layer of their sordid plan. Who had gone through the drawers, who had photographed the documents, who had pushed to act quickly, who had said to wait until my business trip to make their move. I stood there listening, a shudder running through me. I had suspected some of these truths, but to hear them spewed from their own mouths was like a fresh coup. David stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching the family self-destruct, with a look of cold indifference. Just as Ethan yelled, "I was tricked by you," David let out a dry, sharp sneer that sounded like scraping metal. "My $60,000. Now who's going to pay it?" His question was short, but it landed like a sledgehammer on the chaotic room. Because ultimately, behind all the schemes, the forged signatures, and the bare, secret loan applications, was money. A staggering amount that no one in this family could handle. Brenda looked like she was losing her mind. She threw herself between her children, pulling at Ethan with one hand while pushing Chloe back with the other, her voice a hoarse shriek. "Both of you, shut up. Shut up. Strangers are watching and you're still airing all our dirty laundry?" But her plea for them to stop in front of strangers was both pathetic and ridiculous. What was there left to hide? The most shameful, most despicable secrets had already been laid bare by her own children. I watched the scene, my anger no longer a trembling rage. It had passed that threshold and settled into a cold, bright clarity. I stood tall, looking at the 3 of them as if watching the final act of a play, and spoke slowly, my voice, not loud but clear enough for everyone to hear. There's no need to accuse each other anymore. You've all just confessed. My words silenced the room for a few seconds, because it was the truth. It wasn't me who had set a trap, not my lawyer who had baited them. When pushed to the edge, they had turned on each other and thrown the entire truth onto the floor. The official taking notes looked up. He had been calm until now, but his voice turned cold. He looked from Chloe to Ethan and then spoke distinctly. Everything that was just said has been noted. These actions show criminal intent. We will need to bring everyone involved in for questioning. As soon as he finished, Chloe looked like she was about to collapse. She rushed forward with her baby, her face a mess of tears and mucus, her voice a desperate wail. I have a small child. You can't do this to me. I'm just a woman. I just wanted a place for my son to live. Her plea had no effect. The official looked at her, his gaze not angry but stern, and replied with a single chilling sentence. You did this knowing you were raising a small child. That one sentence shut her down. She opened her mouth, then closed it, left with only ragged breaths, and the sound of her baby crying from being held too tightly. There was no more room for her to play the victim. The truly wronged person in this story was never the one who forged her sister-in-law's signature. At that moment, Ethan looked as if all the strength had left him. He staggered back to the sofa and collapsed, his hands on his knees, his shoulders slumping, as if under an immense weight. His face was pale, his lips almost blue. He stared blankly at the floor, his mouth moving as if in a trance, and finally whispered a single broken sentence. It's all over. I didn't know who he was talking to, his mother, his sister, himself, or me, but the words were both weak and too late. Because at this point, what was there left to save? I looked at him one last time. It wasn't the look of a wife angry at her husband or disappointed in him or waiting for him to change. It was the look of someone who had completely withdrawn all affection for the man she once trusted. My voice was steady, each word falling slowly, but with a coldness that cut to the bone. No, for you it's just beginning. My words made Ethan's head snap up. A raw, genuine fear appeared in his eyes, more telling than any apology he had offered all morning. Perhaps only then did he finally understand that the price of betrayal wasn't just an argument or a few days of his wife staying at her parents' house. It was legal repercussions, the loss of his reputation, his job, his marriage. It was losing everything he brought. I thought he could control both appeasing his family and keeping his wife in her place, just as he had done so many times before. No one in that room could maintain their composure any longer. Brenda sat, slumped in her chair, her eyes vacant. Chloe trembled on the floor, holding her son, her messy hair hiding her tear-streaked face. Ethan was hunched over, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and David still stood there, a cold, silent observer, though even he probably hadn't expected everything to unravel so quickly and so shamefully. In that moment, they were all exposed. After that chaotic morning, I never returned to that house alone again. The experience of standing in my own living room, watching my husband and his family tear each other apart, taught me one thing. With people like them, any hesitation on my part would only risk me being dragged down into the mud with them. So, that same week, I completed all the necessary paperwork. I filed a formal complaint for document forgery and unauthorized use of property assets and fully cooperated with the authorities. I had no desire to hear another apology. For me, at that point, everything had to be seen through to its proper legal conclusion. The home equity loan application was, of course, canceled. The financial firm, I wanted nothing more to do with the case once they learned the true owner had already placed a fraud alert on the property and had irrefutable proof of her non-involvement. But the cancellation of the loan didn't end the matter. On the plain contrary, it officially shifted the case into a formal investigation. A series of interviews began. Who went first? Who signed what? Who photographed the documents? Who called the lender? Who pushed to get it done before I sold? The house, it all came out, layer by layer. Chloe was called in the most. At first, she stuck to her tearful act, using her young son as a shield. Whenever the questions got tough, she would cover her face and cry, recounting her sob story of being abandoned by her husband and desperate to provide for her child. But unfortunately for her, you can't cry your way out of calculated actions. The audio recording, the call logs, the text messages, the photos of the prate, documents, the evidence was all there. The more she denied, the more she contradicted her previous statements, and the more she revealed. At the same time, the $60,000 debt to David could no longer be hidden. David was done giving extensions. He was tired of Chloe's lies, excuses, and manipulations. After consulting with his lawyer, he filed a lawsuit to recover the loan. Everything happened fast, so fast that Brenda, still reeling from the fraud investigation, was suddenly buried under a pile of debt notices, court summons, and official letters. Initially, Chloe insisted she could handle it, that she would find the money herself. But talk is cheap. $60,000 is not $600. The jewelry she used to show off, the designer bags she'd bought on payment plans, the scooter she clung to, selling it all was like a drop in the ocean. Olivia later told me that Chloe was seen sitting in a pawn shop sobbing uncontrollably, while the owner impassively appraised her belongings one by one. In the past, that image might have stirred some sympathy in me, but after everything, I just saw it as the price of greed. When you reach for what isn't yours, the day comes when you have to sell off what you thought was most precious. Brenda, the woman who had always criticized me for being calculating, became the one running around desperately for money. She borrowed from relatives, old friends, even the predatory payday lenders she used to look down on. The bitterest irony was that she used to sit in my living room and boast that the family could handle its own problems without begging from outsiders. Now, she was the one on the phone, her voice hoarse from pleading, going from one person to another for a handout. But the debt was a leaking dam. The more she patched, the more it broke. Eventually, when the loan sharks came to collect, with interest compounding on interest, she finally understood what it felt like to be truly cornered. As for Ethan, the consequences came for him faster than he could have imagined. His company couldn't ignore the official inquiries being sent to his workplace, nor the fact that he was implicated in a property fraud case. At first, he was asked to provide a written explanation. Then, he was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. The man who had always seen himself as the head of the household, who had condescendingly told his wife not to let outsiders see their family problems, was now brought down by his own scandal. I heard that after he was suspended, he sat in a coffee shop near his office all day, calling people who wouldn't pick up. Then, one rainy afternoon, he showed up at my parents' house. I was in the living room with my mother when I heard our dog barking. I looked up and saw him. Through the rain-streaked glass door, he was standing on the porch, soaked to the bone, his shirt clinging to him. He looked so pathetic that the old me might have opened the door, but I just stood there, behind the glass, looking at the man who was once my husband as if he were a complete stranger. He knocked once, then twice, his voice hoarse. "Ava, please let me see you. I was wrong. Give me a chance to fix this." I heard every word. My mother, sitting beside me, said nothing. She knew this was my decision alone. I remained still, not out of anger, but because there was simply nothing left to say. When a man has willingly signed papers that could make his wife homeless, when he has sided with his mother and sister to push his wife out of her own bedroom, the words, "I was wrong," arrive far too late to mean anything. I didn't go to the door. I didn't even draw the curtains. I just took out a phone and sent him a single text before putting it down. "You chose to side with action them. Today's consequences are a result of your choice." After the message was sent, I didn't look again. A few moments later, the Tradios.com knocking stopped. Through the glass, I saw him stand there for a long time. Before finally turning and walking away into the rain, he no longer walked like a man who thought he always had a way out. The house they had tried to take remained mine. The deed was secure. My ownership absolute. But the people who had coveted it fell apart, one by one. Chloe lost everything, her money, her support system. Brenda lost her pride, her standing, and was saddled with debt. Ethan lost his job, his reputation, and, most importantly, the marriage he had assumed I would always endure to protect. They weren't robbed of anything. They simply destroyed their own lives with their greed and betrayal. And perhaps that was the most painful punishment of all. The divorce proceedings were quicker than I expected. By then, there was nothing left to hold Ethan and me together. When a marriage reaches the point where a husband is willing to sign away his wife's home, what remains is not love or partnership, but a hollow shell, cracked in too many places to repair. I didn't make a scene. I didn't recount my suffering to others. I just quietly signed where I needed to sign, submitted the required documents, and ended things as cleanly as possible. Some things only become more exhausting the longer you drag them out. And at a certain point, letting go isn't about no longer feeling pain. It's about understanding there's no longer any point in holding on. I eventually sold the old condo, just as I had originally planned. The only difference was that I no longer felt the excitement of a wife wanting to surprise her husband. I sold it with complete, sober clarity, as if closing a chapter of my old life. On moving day, I packed everything myself. I opened each drawer, folded each piece of clothing, and placed each item into a cardboard box. I looked at small things, a ceramic mug from when we were first married, the curtains I'd spent an entire afternoon choosing, the small orchid that once sat on my bedroom windowsill. A sense of stillness came over me, not regret for the objects, but a quiet acknowledgement that each one held a piece of my former hope for a peaceful home, for a husband who would stand by me, for a family that, while not perfect, at least understood boundaries. I moved into a new apartment in a quieter neighborhood. It wasn't extravagant, but it was spacious, full of light, and most importantly, it was peaceful. There were no shuffling slippers outside my door in the morning, no critical voice echoing from the kitchen, no feeling of having to guess who was in a bad mood. The moment I walked in. The first night I slept there, I lay in the sparsely furnished room listening to the soft hum of the air conditioner, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Some losses feel monumental at first, but only when you step away from them do you realize that what you lost was actually saving you. One weekend afternoon, Olivia came by. She brought a bag of fruit, walked around the apartment, and nodded in approval. "The view from this balcony is amazing," she said. I made tea, and we sat by the glass door, watching the afternoon sun fall on the trees below. After a while, she turned to me and asked softly, "Do you have any regrets?" I was silent for a few seconds. "Of course," I said. "How could I not? It was 4 years of my life, all that effort, all that patience, all the times I swallowed my frustrations just to keep the peace. No one walks away from a failed marriage completely unscathed. But then I looked out at the balcony, where the light was soft and warm on the pliced tiles, and I heard myself answer with a surprising lightness. I do have regrets, but not for losing them. I regret that I tolerated it for so long. Olivia didn't say anything more. She just sat there quietly and poured me more tea. Perhaps that's what true friends do. They understand that some things don't need a lot of comforting words. Just having someone sit with you in silence as you finally say it out loud is enough. That evening, after Olivia left, I stood on my balcony for a long time. A gentle breeze carried the scent of leaves after a distant rain. I remembered what my mother had told me long before I was married, words I had laughed off as a young woman. She had been brushing my hair and said, "You can love someone, my dear, but don't ever let them take your life from you." Back then, I thought she was worrying too much. I believed that if I just lived with kindness, patience, and a little sacrifice, people would eventually see my decorin. Good heart. It wasn't until I was dragging my own suitcase out of my home in the middle of the night that I understood. Some people, the more you give, the more they take. The more silent you are, the more they assume you don't feel pain. This time I didn't just save my life, I took it back. Not by shouting to vent my anger or by stooping to their level. I simply chose to open my eyes. I chose to call the right people, to save the right evidence, and to let the law and the truth do the rest. To many, that might seem cold, but I think sometimes it's the only fair way. Because angry words can be forgotten, twisted, or dismissed as petty arguments. But the truth, once it's set in its proper place, does its own work. People still ask me if, after everything, I feel hatred. I think I feel the pain, the disappointment, the regret for the years lost, but not much hate, because I know that they have already received their own consequences. I don't need to stand by and watch them fall to feel at peace. Just knowing that I got out is enough. I stood there for a long time, until the city lights began to twinkle on. Down, below, life went on, and for the first time in a very long time, I could smile. Not because I was enduring something, not to keep the peace, and not for fear of upsetting someone else. It was the smile of a person who had finally walked away from the place that had exhausted her soul. And I knew from that day forward, my life was truly beginning again,